Above our master bed, we have these awkward square sunlight windows. We didn't want blinds or curtains, so today I'll show you how to make these cool sliding barnwood door covers. Alright, this is the lumber we got. We are using 1x4 common board. Alright, 1x4 common board for the frame, and then we got this 1x6 shiplap. We're going to use this for the backing. Our windows are about 22 inches squared. They're not exactly squared, but we want to go a little bit wider, and we're doing about 25 inches squared for the doors. Once I figured out what I want the height of the doors to be, I cut the width of the shiplap the same exact dimension. One thing to keep in mind when you're figuring out your dimensions is the grooves on the shiplap. If you don't want those grooves on your door, then measure without the grooves so you have a completely square window. And of course, you'll have to cut off the grooves. For this one, I'm using a new chop saw. It's nice because it has this guard at the end where I can do multiple cuts after I set the guard, and I know that they're all going to be the same length. Keep your scrap shiplap in a separate pile so you can do some stain and paint testing with them. If you've never worked with this shiplap, you'll notice it has two grooves on either end. These grooves are different depths. One's like 5/16, the other one's like 9/16. And so you can install it on the wall with a small gap. Or in our case, you can install them with the faces alternating front to back and have them flush. Once you have them all cut, you can go ahead and sand all these pieces. With those scrap pieces, go ahead and try a few things with some different types of stains. We'll go into the details of what we did for our stain later. Once you're done sanding, you can start putting your pattern together. What I planned to do was to glue all the shiplap together, so it would be one single piece, and then use the common board to make whatever barnwood door type pattern and put it on top. If you don't want the big gap on the top of the shiplap on one end, you can saw it off. If you don't care, it doesn't matter because you probably won't see it. For us, I just decided to chop off the top lip and cut my common board so it would be flush with the top, but then have a small gap on the bottom. Now, as a warning, this is probably not the best use of a chop saw. A table saw would be better. I just don't have a table saw, so I did this as safely and carefully as I possibly could with the chop saw, just essentially cutting off the end. You could also use a jigsaw, a skill saw, use what you have, but of course be safe about it. So for this project, we decided to get a Craig pocket screw system. What it does is you drill some holes into the board, and then your screws go right into the next board to fasten them together securely. So after you figure out which side your pocket screws will go on, you simply put it in the jig, you adjust this for the clamp, you clamp it together, and then you can screw it in. It comes with a drill bit. You set the guard on the drill bit so it matches up with that 3/4 at the end of the threads, because this is a 3/4 width board. And then you set the height adjustment for 3/4 inch. We're doing some testing with just an old house vacuum we have. It didn't work great. We ended up waiting to get a shop vac, which works a lot better. But you essentially drill down until you hit the stops and just decide what width you want it. We're using A and C for this one. And if you did it right, unclamp it, you should have these nice 2 evenly spaced pocket holes. So you'll want to buy the Craig pocket screws. Since these are 3/4 inch boards, we decided the 1.25 inch screw would work well. You see how it goes in, but it's not long enough to go all the way through. One thing that's very helpful is the Craig clamp. We bought this self-adjusting clamp. What you'll do is just fit your boards together and clamp them together and then screw it in. I'll show you more when we're actually putting it together. So here's the pattern that I drew up for this one. I put all the pocket holes on the back side so that when you screw it to the shiplap, they would all be hidden. Alright, time to glue the shiplap together. Remember, after you cut your common board, you want to make sure that you get the correct size groove on the top or the bottom that you plan for your common board. So just double check the measurements before you glue it up. For the glue up, just put a bead of wood Gorilla Glue is what we use just across the whole bottom, and then use your finger to spread it evenly over there and stick it together. We're not even using clamps. If you have clamps and you want to use them, great, perfect, that'll help. We just decided to put a big bin on top of ours because we had a flat surface. Once it's all together, make sure it's even, and then you can wipe off the rest of the glue on top with just a finger, and sometimes a wet rag helps. Or wipe with your finger and then wipe your finger with a wet rag. It's better and easier than sanding it off, in my opinion. Hey, if you made it this far in the video, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe, and let us know what other videos you'd like to see on the channel. Once you get your shiplap all glued up, you should let it dry for 24 hours. It shouldn't need any fasteners. In the meantime, you can start doing the pocket holes for the square frame is where I started first. Lay out your frame and decide which portion you want on the front. If there are any unique features on the board, you'll want to put the pocket holes on the opposite side because the pocket holes will be the side that's not showing. Keep that in mind. We got our shop vac, just use an attachment to attach it to the jig. Remember, before you start drilling, make sure the height adjustment is set for the width of your board and the depth of your drill bit is stopped at the 3/4 inch. Those guides on the jig should help you. Once you're ready, lay out the entire outside frame onto the table. You want to be sure that when you start screwing that you screw all the holes on the same side. Hook up your vacuum and have some fun. Once you have all your pocket holes done, it's time to put it together. We decided to use wood glue as well as pocket screws on this part just for the extra strength. This is a good part for the kids to help out. Also, you may want to use napkins when you put the clamp on for the extra glue drip. When you've got it flush on the sides and it's clamped together, go ahead and put your screws in. Again, these are the 1¼ screws. Now, before you do that, you want to make sure that you have a screw gun or a drill that has a torque setting. That's the dial on the top of your screw gun. On our rigid screw gun, it was somewhere between 10 and 15 was about a good setting for these screws. Also, there's a switch on the side of ours. Make sure that is in the torque setting and not a drill or a hammer drill setting. Wipe off the excess glue and repeat for all 4 corners. Again, once you get the screws in, you don't really need clamps on this because I think the screws are clamp enough. As you're putting these together, you can make adjustments to your torque setting based on how tight the 2 wood pieces are pulled together. If you don't want to use the napkin method, you're going to be painting it anyway, so it really doesn't matter if you have a mark to it. 1 corner done and finish with the rest of the square. I made mine where the 2 top pieces are the same length and the 2 side pieces are the same length. Okay, now that we have the square frame in place, let's start making the X. Alright, here's the tricky part. There are multiple ways to do this. This is just the method that I used. For your first board, what you'll want to do is just lay it on top of your existing frame and then use a pencil to mark the exact intersections. And then between the pencil lines, that is going to be your exact angle that you need to cut. Now for the small pieces, once you have that first angle cut, you can put it in place on the bottom corner, and then on the top corner, just line that same board up with the top right corner. That should give you the correct angle for the middle piece. Then just take your pencil and mark that intersection. Then you can pull out a square and just transfer that line up to the top of the board, because this is what you need to be able to see to cut your angle across that board. Now remember to mark it on both sides, because this is not going to be a 90-degree angle, obviously. Then once you have both the sides marked, it's just a matter of connecting the 2 dots, and that should give you the correct angle. You could also try another method, which is to line the bottom corner up and then line your square that's parallel with the crossbar, and then have that be your angle. This is where the miter saw is probably the best tool for the job. Just remember when you cut it, to check the blade as it comes down, make sure you get the right length by cutting on the correct side of the line. In case you're new at this or you're just unsure of the exact angles or unsure if you got it right, you could always cut it a little bit long and then take it back to your setup and make sure that it's the exact angle that you want. Then bring it back to the miter saw with more correct angles and then just trim it down to size. Once you have all your boards cut, you can go back in and piece them all together, make sure they all fit. One thing to note is your crossbar that you do with the separate pieces, make sure they're lined up as best you can. And make sure those corner pieces are as close to the corner as you can get them. Okay, now that you have the barn door pattern that you want, it's time to put all these together. For this, I'm going to use pocket screws. Now remember, after you have your pattern done, you'll want to flip it over so that you're screwing the holes on the back, the part that you do not want showing. Now the easiest way for me to do this is to pull out individual pieces and make sure that as you screw them in, you flip them around and screw them on the same side. So all the pocket holes will be on the same side, which will be hidden against the shiplap. As you do these corner pieces, just line up where the drill bit is going to hit the most part of the wood. Then clamp it together, attach your vacuum, and then drill 2 holes per board. Same side. Drill. Oop-de-doo. Okay, this was fun. Another thing before you start screwing that you may want to do is glue it as you screw it. So I just took some diluted wood glue, put it on a plate, just like half wood glue, half water, and just kind of soak up the end grain in the glue water mixture. Let that dry for a little bit, and then when you're ready to screw it together, you can put the wood glue on as you screw it. Once your pocket holes are drilled, it's time to put them together. We used 1.25" pocket screws. Remember, put a bead of glue and then stick it in place. You can either lay it on a flat table and put them together that way, or you can use one of these Craig clamps or another clamp that you have to make sure that they don't twist or bow as you screw them in. It's easier to put the longer piece in first because you're going to screw the smaller pieces into the longer piece. So get it into place with your glue. I just did it on a flat table here. And then screw it into place. If you have any spare pieces of this wood, you may want to try doing some test pocket screws and some test screwing, just so you know that your torque setting is correct. Test it, just make sure that you get it tight and aligned, and make sure it doesn't come through the other side. And of course, feel free to do whatever pattern you want on this. I like this because it was symmetrical and would be the same on both doors. Okay, now that it's all put together, we can talk about the stain. If you haven't sanded anything yet, now is a good time to sand all the surfaces that we'll be showing. After some testing, we ended up going with one stain. Varathane has a whole bunch of wood stains. We ended up using the carbon gray. Alright, when you're done sanding, wipe all the dust off, put on some gloves, and then use a cloth to dip it in the single stain. You can wipe it on as thinly or as thickly as you want. Let it sit for about 2 to 3 minutes and then use a different cloth to wipe off the excess. If your doors are going to be outside, be sure to put a clear protective coat on it from weathering. Ours are indoors, so we skipped that step.
We're going to attach the back, the shiplap piece, to the front cross beam and frame of the window coverings. So we flip them upside down on this one so you can see the back side. This is the back side of this top piece and then the shiplap. And we're just going to put our screws in through the back sides so that way you don't really see them. So they're just going to go in, and when we put them in, we'll probably put them in just a little bit below the surface so they don't rub against the wall.
So for that, we used these number 8" construction screws. They are a star bit. The nice thing is that the box comes with a bit, so you don't have to buy it extra. Just double check the depth and make sure it won't come through to the other side, because we want these to be hidden. Just remember, when you start screwing this together, make sure you're on the torque setting and that your torque is set very low so it doesn't go all the way through. And it's always a good idea to test on a scrap piece of wood first. Remember, when you screw these together, don't put screws where your bolt holes will go for your mounting brackets. Since everything is already screwed to each other on the faceplate, you may choose where you want to put other screws. I put one in the middle and one in each corner, and that's plenty sufficient. I personally like my torque setting to where I can screw it in, but it doesn't sink the screw head all the way in, to where it stops on the torque, and then I just manually, gently push it a little bit farther in so it's for sure not going to go out the other side. Once you get that all put together, you can mount your wheel brackets. Your windows are probably unique. For ours, we just bought ours on Amazon. It's a long bar piece that came in 2 sections. Our bracket just came with instructions on where to drill the holes, so we just measured from the outside and down from the top to drill the holes all the way through. Our instructions said to use a 1/2-inch drill bit. I went with a slightly smaller 3/8 drill bit, which didn't really work out as well because I didn't have the wiggle room that I needed. As precise as I'd like to be, it's always just a little bit difficult to get the exact position of a drill bit. So having a slightly wider drill bit than your bolts, as long as it gets covered, is much better in my opinion. Once you're done drilling the holes, you now can bolt the bracket to the doors. Our brackets came with the hardware. We had the bolts and the washers and the nuts, so that was really nice. One of the hardest parts about this project was getting this rail mounted, centered, and level on the wall. We opted for one long rail that goes across the whole wall. It came in 2 separate pieces that just puzzle piece connects in the middle. Since it was difficult to hold the whole entire connected rail up on the wall, we centered it together on the floor and then transferred it up and marked all of our holes. Once we had all the holes marked and the anchors in, we were able to mount the rails on each end and then bring it up to level in the middle. Then it was just a matter of putting the bolts and the spacers through the rest of the rail. The wall anchors we got weren't quite long enough, so we ended up just buying some separate bolts to go in the wall anchors and painted the fronts black to match the rest of the rail. One thing we wanted to make sure of is that the bolts did not rub up against the wall. So what Rebecca did was use some hot glue to double up some felt and then hot glue the double layer felt over top of the back bolts. Meanwhile, I'm installing the rail guards. I came in about 4.5 inches off the end and drilling about in the middle of the common board there. Made my marks. I put some tape on my drill bit so I would only go in a set amount. This is pre-drilling on both sides. Then I screwed the rail stoppers in. You mount these with a single screw, so once your door is on the hinges, you just flip these around, and that prevents the door from coming off the rail. And that's it. It's a unique decorative alternative to just having drapes or curtains. I think overall it turned out really nice. I really like how the textures turned out. The wood really pops. It looks like a vintage old wood, and they slide great. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you made it this far, hopefully you're using this as a guide for your own barnwood doors. Please remember to like and subscribe and let us know what else you'd like to see.